She realized she might freeze to death when the snow began to erase her footprints faster than she could make new ones. Clara Whitmore stopped in the middle of the road, if it could still be called a road at all, and turned in a slow circle. The world around her was nothing but white and wind. The sky pressed low, heavy and colorless, as if it were slowly lowering itself to meet the ground. Somewhere behind her was the town she had left that morning. Somewhere ahead was nothing she could name with certainty. And in her coat pocket, folded carefully as if that might make it last longer, were $37 and a termination letter that still smelled faintly of ink. Only a week earlier, Clara had believed her life was modest but stable. She taught children to read. She graded papers at night. She rented a small room above a bakery where the floors creaked and the walls held warmth better than promises ever did. When the school board announced budget cuts, she listened politely, assuming seniority would protect her. It did not. By noon, her desk was cleared. By evening, the landlord was apologetic but firm. Winter was coming, and he had family arriving. So she packed. Not everything, just what could fit into one suitcase and a satchel worn soft by years of use. She told herself she would find work in the next town. She told herself teachers were always needed somewhere. She told herself many things as the bus dropped her at the edge of the county line and the wind began to rise. Now the wind no longer felt like weather. It felt like pressure, like hands pushing her backward, then sideways, then nowhere at all. Clara pulled her scarf tighter and tried to walk again. Each step was heavier than the last, her boots filling with snow, her breath turning sharp and shallow. She thought of the children she used to teach, how they laughed when she drew crooked letters on the board. She thought of how quiet the classroom had been after the announcement, desks already assigned to someone else. Pride told her to keep moving. Survival told her pride was running out of time. That was when she saw the light. At first it looked like a trick of exhaustion, a pale glow trembling behind curtains of snow. She stood still until the ache in her legs reminded her she could not afford doubt. The light grew steadier as she moved toward it, resolving into the square shape of a window, then another. A house. No, bigger than a house. Solid, dark timber against the white. By the time she reached the porch, her hands were numb enough that knocking felt distant, as if it were happening to someone else. The door opened almost immediately. The man who stood there was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair dark with streaks of early gray. He wore no surprise on his face, only a brief assessment, the way someone looks at weather and decides what must be done. "You'll come inside," he said. It was not a question. Warmth hit Clara so suddenly that her knees threatened to give way. She stepped in, blinking as the door closed behind her, sealing out the storm with a final, decisive sound. The house smelled of wood smoke and coffee. The floor beneath her boots was clean, worn smooth by years of use. "I'm Samuel Hartley," the man said, already taking her coat. "Sit. You're shaking." She sat. A mug appeared in her hands. The coffee was strong and bitter and perfect. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind screamed like something offended by being denied entry. When Clara could finally trust her voice, she said, "Thank you." Samuel nodded once, as if gratitude were an understood part of the exchange, not the reason for it. He watched her over the rim of his own mug, not unkindly, but without curiosity either. "The storm won't ease before morning," he said. "Roads close fast out here." "I was trying to get to the next town," Clara replied. She did not say she had no idea where she was anymore. "You wouldn't have made it," he said simply. Silence settled again, heavier now, filled with things unasked. Eventually, Samuel set his mug down and spoke in the same even tone. "I have 2 sons, 8 and 6. They need consistency." He paused, choosing words the way someone chooses tools. "I need a steady household. Winter makes hiring help difficult. You needed shelter. That much was clear the moment you stepped onto my porch." Clara's fingers tightened around the mug. She felt suddenly very awake. "What are you saying?" she asked. "I'm proposing an arrangement," Samuel said. "A marriage in name and duty, separate rooms, shared responsibilities, protection from weather and want. It would not be romantic. It would be practical." The fire popped loudly, as if punctuating the sentence. Clara stared at him, certain she had misheard. Marriage. The word felt too large for the room, for the storm, for the life she had just lost. And yet, as she considered it, the shape of the proposal became clearer. No pity, no rescue. An exchange, offered plainly. "You don't know me," she said. "I know enough," Samuel replied. "You walked into a blizzard instead of asking for help sooner. That tells me something." Outside, the wind slammed against the walls, rattling the windows hard enough to make Clara flinch. She thought of the road disappearing behind her, of the white swallowing everything without distinction. She thought of $37. She thought of how cold it had been, how fast the cold had worked its way into her bones. "I won't pretend this is anything it isn't," Samuel continued. "I won't ask you to replace anyone. I won't expect affection, only presence, only honesty." Clara looked down at her hands. They were still trembling, though the worst of the cold had passed. Pride whispered that this was too much, too fast, too strange. Survival reminded her that winter did not care about pride. "I need the night," she said finally. Samuel nodded. "You have it. The guest room is ready." As he showed her down the hall, Clara noticed how quiet the house was. Not empty exactly, but paused, as if holding its breath. Somewhere deeper within, she heard the soft sound of children sleeping, unaware that the shape of their lives might be changing even now. That night, as the storm raged without mercy, Clara lay awake listening to the wind and the steady ticking of a clock on the far wall. She thought about contracts and choices, about warmth earned and warmth borrowed. She thought about how sometimes the last door is the one you never expected to knock on. And as the snow buried the road outside, erasing all signs of how she had arrived, Clara Whitmore understood that by morning, there would be no simple way back. She would either walk forward into something unknown or step once more into the cold. By morning, the storm had not softened. It had settled in, as if it meant to stay. Clara woke to a quiet so complete it felt deliberate. No wind clawed at the walls now. No snow struck the windows. The silence was thick, padded, the kind that made even breathing feel like a disturbance. For a moment, she did not know where she was. Then she remembered the firelight, the calm voice, the offer that had hovered between mercy and necessity. She dressed slowly, aware of the unfamiliar room. The bed was neatly made with a heavy quilt folded just so. A chair sat against the wall, unused. Everything in the room suggested care without comfort, order without warmth. It was a place meant for resting, not for staying. Downstairs, the smell of coffee guided her to the kitchen. Samuel Hartley stood at the counter, sleeves rolled, moving with the efficiency of someone who had long ago learned to rely on routine. He looked up as she entered, nodded once, and slid a cup toward her. "You can leave when the road's open," he said. "No obligation beyond breakfast." Clara wrapped her hands around the mug. Outside the window, the world was white and unmoving. Snow had erased the fence lines, the hills, the distance between one place and another. It did not look like a morning that offered options. "I'd like to talk," she said. Samuel inclined his head, a small acknowledgement. He did not sit. He waited. They spoke without raising their voices. Clara asked questions she had rehearsed through the night, about rooms, about expectations, about money, spoken carefully, without numbers that might feel like weights dropped onto the table. Samuel answered plainly. He did not dress the arrangement in language meant to make it easier to swallow. "There would be work," he said. "Shared responsibility, teaching if you wish. I won't pretend it would be simple." "And your sons," Clara said. "What do they know?" "That someone might be staying," he replied. Nothing more. Clara took a breath. She had learned long ago that choices rarely announced themselves as good or bad. They arrived dressed as circumstances and waited to be recognized. "I won't replace their mother," she said. "I wouldn't ask you to," Samuel said at once. "That place isn't open." Something in his tone told her the subject was closed, not out of cruelty, but out of careful protection. The decision did not come with relief. It came with weight. When Clara agreed, it was with the understanding that survival sometimes required borrowing certainty from the future. They set boundaries with the precision of people who knew how easily lines could blur. Separate rooms, separate lives, at least in the beginning. A shared table. By the time the storm loosened its hold, the agreement was already in place. 12 days later, Clara stood in the front hall with her suitcase at her feet, listening to the sound of footsteps on the stairs. 2 boys appeared, one behind the other, as similar as reflections, but shaped by different silences. The older one, Evan, watched her with eyes that missed nothing. His posture was careful, his expression guarded, as if he were holding something fragile just out of sight. The younger, Luke, leaned forward with open curiosity, hands clasped behind his back, a question already forming on his face. "This is Clara," Samuel said. "She'll be staying." Luke smiled immediately. "Do you read stories?" he asked, skipping the introduction entirely. "I do," Clara said. "Sometimes more than once." "That's good," Luke said solemnly. "Some stories need it." Evan said nothing. He looked past her, toward the closed door at the end of the hall, then back again. Clara felt the assessment in his gaze, the quiet test of whether she belonged to the present or threatened the past. The house revealed itself slowly. It was warm, solid, built to last through winters that did not care who occupied it. But there were no signs of softness, no flowers on the table, no stray objects left where someone had paused mid-thought. The rooms felt paused, as if waiting for instruction. Clara did not rush to change that. She unpacked only what she needed. She asked where things went instead of deciding for herself. When she cooked, she kept the meals simple. When she spoke to the boys, she did not ask questions that demanded answers. In the evenings, she read aloud by the fire. Luke curled close, his head resting easily against the arm of the chair. Evan sat farther away, always listening, never leaning in. When the story ended, he stood and left without comment. His footsteps measured, controlled. There was a door in the house that remained closed. Clara noticed it on the second day. It sat at the end of the hall, its handle polished by hands that no longer reached for it. Samuel never walked past it. The boys never mentioned it. Clara did not ask. Instead, she taught. Not lessons in the formal sense, but the kind that happened between moments. Letters traced in ash on the hearthstone. Numbers counted out with dried beans at the table. Luke laughed when he made mistakes. Evan corrected himself quietly, jaw set, as if error were something to be endured rather than learned from. At night, when the house settled into its deep stillness, Clara lay awake and listened. The quiet was not empty. It was full of things being held back. Grief, she recognized, not as a sudden wound, but as a long-standing ache that had been given rules. Samuel kept his distance with care. He was never unkind, never abrupt. He spoke to her as an equal in responsibility, but not yet as a partner. Clara sensed that trust in this house was something earned through presence rather than promises. One afternoon, while the boys were outside, Luke asked, "Are you leaving when the snow melts?" Clara paused before answering. "I'm here now," she said. "That's what I can promise." Luke nodded, satisfied. Evan, who had been close enough to hear, did not look up. The days lengthened. The house began to sound different. Small noises crept in, hesitant at first. Laughter that stopped as quickly as it started. Footsteps that lingered instead of passing through. The fire burned longer in the evenings. Clara understood then that the house was not empty because it lacked people. It was empty because it had been afraid to remember how to hold them. And without naming it, without forcing anything open, she began to stay. The first time Clara noticed the door, she assumed it led to storage. It stood at the end of the upstairs hall, painted the same pale color as the walls, its surface unmarked except for the faintest wear around the handle. In most houses, a door like that would barely register. Here, it felt deliberate. Closed not by accident, but by agreement. Days passed before she realized no one ever walked past it. Evan stopped short every time his path brought him close. Luke veered away without noticing, already distracted by whatever came next. Samuel never glanced at it at all. The door existed in the way grief sometimes did in families, present and powerful, yet carefully stepped around. Clara did not ask about it. She had learned that some rooms opened only when they felt safe enough to do so. Winter lingered. Stubborn and gray, the snow outside softened into a crust that glittered in the pale light, beautiful and treacherous at once. Inside, the routines of the house settled into something almost comfortable. Breakfasts came with quiet conversation. Lessons stretched a little longer each day. The fire became a constant companion rather than a necessity. One evening, as Clara cleaned the table, Evan remained behind after Luke ran off to play. He stood with his hands tucked into the pockets of his sweater, his eyes fixed on the wood grain beneath them. "You don't have to stay," he said suddenly. Clara looked at him, careful not to crowd the moment. "I know." "You could leave when the snow goes," he continued, his voice even, rehearsed. "People do." She nodded. "They can." He waited, as if expecting her to argue. When she didn't, his shoulders eased a fraction. "Why are you here?" he asked. The question was not sharp. It was tired. Clara considered her answer. "Because this is where I am needed right now." Evan studied her face, searching for something he could trust. Whatever he found there seemed to satisfy him, at least enough to move on. He turned and walked toward the stairs, stopping just short of the closed door. Without looking back, he said, "My mother liked the morning light." The words settled between them, fragile and heavy. Then he was gone. That night, Clara lay awake longer than usual. She thought of locked rooms and unsaid things. She thought of how carefully Evan guarded his memories, not as relics, but as living parts of himself. It was not anger that kept him distant. It was loyalty. The truth revealed itself in pieces after that. Samuel mentioned Rose one afternoon while repairing a hinge. It was not a story, just a name, spoken quietly, as if testing whether the air would carry it. She had a way of making the house feel smaller, he said, in a good way. Clara listened. She did not ask him to continue. Later, Luke brought out a wooden horse, its paint worn smooth by small hands. "Mama made this," he said, holding it up proudly. "She said it was for when the baby came." He smiled as he spoke, unaware of the weight of what he had said. Clara felt it settle gently but firmly into place. The baby had not lived. The words were never spoken aloud, but they hovered in every pause. Rose had died giving birth. The child had followed her. Loss had arrived in pairs, too close together to separate. Evan remembered everything. It explained the careful order of the house, the way Samuel worked longer hours than necessary, the reason the nursery door remained closed. It was not denial that kept it shut. It was fear. Fear that opening it would collapse the careful balance they had built to survive. The moment came without ceremony. A late afternoon sun slipped through the windows, pale and unexpected. Clara was sorting books when she heard the click of a lock turning. She looked up to see Evan standing in the hallway, the door open behind him. He did not invite her in. He did not need to. The room was preserved in a way that felt almost reverent. A crib stood beneath the window, untouched. Folded blankets rested on a chair. A small shelf held toys arranged by size rather than use. Dust lay evenly across every surface, as if even time had been asked to wait. "My mother picked the color," Evan said, his voice steady. "She said it was soft enough for sleeping." Clara stepped inside slowly, her movements deliberate. She did not touch anything. She did not comment on the emptiness. "She sang," Evan continued. "Not loud, just enough so you had to listen." Clara closed her eyes, imagining it. The room felt fuller for it. "She didn't come back," he said, the sentence falling flat, stripped of emotion by repetition. Clara opened her eyes and met his gaze. "No," she said. "She didn't." Evan swallowed. "If I like you, does that mean I forget her?" The question broke something open, not in the room, but between them. Clara knelt so they were level. "No," she said gently. "It means you remember her in a different way. Love doesn't run out just because you use it again." He considered this, the way children consider truths that might reshape them. Slowly, he nodded. They stood together in the doorway when Samuel appeared at the end of the hall. He froze, the sight of the open room stopping him short. For a moment, Clara thought he might turn away. Instead, he stepped forward. No one spoke. They did not need to. That evening, the door remained open. The house felt different after, as if a breath it had been holding was finally released. Clara understood then that healing did not arrive with declarations or resolutions. It arrived quietly, through permission, through allowing memory to exist without fear. And in that quiet understanding, the family shifted, not all at once, but enough to matter. Sunday arrived without ceremony, the way it often did on the plains, slipping into the week as if it had always been there. The snow had softened enough for the roads to reopen, though winter still lingered at the edges of everything. Clara rode into town with Samuel and the boys, the wagon moving slowly along the familiar route. The landscape felt altered now, not because it had changed, but because she had. What once looked like distance now looked like belonging she had not yet earned. The church stood at the center of town, modest and white, its steps worn smooth by generations of careful feet. Bells rang once, then stopped, leaving the air expectant. People gathered in small groups, voices low, eyes sharp with recognition. Clara felt them notice her before they spoke her name. She was not introduced as a guest. She was not ignored either. She occupied a space between those two states, visible without context, familiar without explanation. Samuel greeted people politely, his tone steady, his posture unchanged. The boys walked between them. Luke swung his legs with idle enthusiasm. Evan held himself straight, alert. Inside, the pews filled slowly. Clara sat where Samuel directed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She listened to the opening hymn, the voices around her blending into something steady and practiced. The sound was comforting, but the quiet beneath it carried weight. She felt it when the looks came. Not openly hostile, not kind, curious, measuring. Rose Hartley had been loved here. Clara could feel it in the way people glanced toward the empty space that memory still occupied. Comparisons were unspoken but present, hovering like smoke that refused to clear. When the service ended, conversation resumed as if on cue. Compliments were exchanged. Weather was discussed. Clara stood beside Samuel, answering questions when they were asked, her voice calm, her words careful. Then someone laughed softly behind her. "It must be nice," a woman said, not unkindly, but not gently either, "to find security so quickly." The sentence was light. The meaning beneath it was not, another voice followed. Rose would have done things differently. Samuel's jaw tightened, though he said nothing. Clara felt the weight of the moment settle, the kind that invited defense or retreat. She chose neither. Before she could respond, a smaller voice cut through the air. "She reads to us," Luke said. The conversation faltered. People turned, surprised. Luke looked around the circle, unbothered by attention. "Every night, even when we ask for the same story again." "And she stays," Evan added quietly. The word landed harder than any accusation. Evan stepped forward, his hands clasped, his eyes steady. "She stayed when the storms came back. She stayed when we were angry. She never asked us to forget our mother." Silence spread, not awkward, but profound. "She fixed the broken latch," Luke continued helpfully. "And she taught me how to spell my name all the way through." No one laughed this time. Clara felt something shift, not triumph, recognition. The judgment did not vanish, it softened, it lost its edge. People nodded, some looked away, thoughtful. The church doors opened wider, letting in a draft of cold air that felt almost cleansing. On the ride home, no one spoke of it. The moment did not need explanation. It had done its work quietly, the way truths often did when given space to breathe. That afternoon, Clara returned to her small classroom near the edge of town. It was nothing more than a repurposed storage room with a table and a chalkboard that had seen better years. Still, children gathered there, drawn by routine and warmth. She taught letters and numbers, not because anyone required it, but because learning had a way of creating order where none had existed. Parents lingered at the door, curious, cautious, slowly warming. The ranch felt different when they returned. Less watched, less measured, but not less vulnerable. Samuel stood at the fence line that evening, counting cattle with the precision of habit. Clara joined him, the cold biting at her cheeks. 9 are missing, he said. The number was small enough to be deliberate, large enough to matter. Could they have wandered? Clara asked. Samuel shook his head. No tracks, no signs. He did not say more, but she felt the tension rise, sharp and unwelcome. He explained later, by the fire, his voice low so the boys would not hear. There had been offers, pressure dressed as opportunity. A man named Victor Sloan, speaking of progress and rail lines, of land better used than held. Samuel had refused. The missing cattle felt like a response. Clara listened, her expression thoughtful rather than afraid. She had seen pressure before, in quieter forms, in letters stamped official and conversations held behind closed doors. This felt similar, intentional. Marshal Henry Cole arrived the next morning, his presence calm but serious. He confirmed what Samuel already suspected. Theft like this did not happen by chance. It was meant to weaken, to isolate, to hurry a decision. Winter helps them, the marshal said. Makes people desperate. The words echoed uncomfortably. As evening fell, the wind returned, not as fierce as before, but persistent. Snow began again, light at first, then heavier. Clara moved through the house with quiet purpose. She checked doors. She prepared the cellar just in case. No one had asked her to. She did it because she understood what came next. Samuel watched her without comment. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that this was no longer just shelter and obligation. That night, Clara lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of the house. The fire murmured. The clock ticked steadily. Outside, snow fell with the patience of something that believed it would win eventually. She thought of the church, of the eyes that had judged and then reconsidered. She thought of Evan's steady voice and Luke's earnest certainty. She thought of land and pressure and the way danger often arrived quietly, asking to be mistaken for inconvenience. Above all, she understood that the arrangement she had entered had already changed shape. What had begun as survival was becoming defense, and the night was not finished with them yet. The ranch did not feel the same after the cattle went missing. Nothing visible had changed at first. The fence lines still stretched across the land in steady, familiar angles. The barn stood solid against the pale horizon. The wind moved the same way it always had, whispering across dry grass and snow-crusted earth. And yet, something unseen had shifted, like a weight moved just slightly off balance. Samuel counted the herd again the next morning, slower this time, his eyes tracking each familiar shape with deliberate care. Clara watched from the porch, the cold biting through her gloves as she held a mug of coffee she had forgotten to drink. When he finished, he did not look back right away. 9, he said at last. Not angry, not alarmed, just certain. Clara stepped down from the porch and joined him at the fence. She had learned enough by now to recognize the meaning of his tone. This was not loss by accident. This was a message. They didn't wander, he continued. They were taken. She looked at the ground, at the absence of tracks where there should have been confusion, chaos, signs of panic. Instead, there was nothing. Clean, intentional. Who would do that? She asked. Samuel exhaled slowly. Someone who wants me to feel pressure without seeing their face. He did not speak Victor Sloan's name yet, but Clara heard it anyway. carried in the shape of the sentence. She remembered the careful words Samuel had used before: progress, opportunity, rail lines that would change everything, land better used than held. She remembered how Samuel had refused, not loudly, not proudly, but firmly. The marshal arrived before noon, his horse moving at a steady pace that suggested neither hurry nor ease. Henry Cole dismounted with a nod, his presence grounding in a way Clara had not expected. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He walked the fence line, studied the barn, knelt where the earth had been disturbed just enough to notice. "This wasn't done by locals," he said eventually. "Too clean, too patient." "Railroad men?" Clara asked. The marshal glanced at her, surprised but not offended. "You've been paying attention." She smiled faintly. "You learn certain things when you teach children. Patterns matter." Henry Cole nodded. "This kind of theft is meant to weaken, not steal. They want you tired, worried, ready to sell." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I'm not selling." "I didn't think you would," the marshal said. "But winter favors men who wait." After he left, the ranch settled into a watchful quiet. Samuel doubled his checks. Gates were secured more carefully. Lights stayed on longer at night. Clara noticed these changes not as signs of fear, but of preparation. She matched them in her own way. That afternoon, she asked Samuel where the root cellar key was kept. He told her without question. She checked supplies, arranging them neatly, making sure nothing would need to be searched for in the dark. She did not announce what she was doing. She did not dramatize it. She simply prepared. The boys sensed the shift before anyone explained it to them. Luke grew quieter, staying closer to the house, his usual energy tempered by uncertainty. Evan watched everything, his eyes sharp, his posture alert. He did not ask questions. He did not need answers. That evening, as snow began to fall again, lighter than before but persistent, Evan stood beside Clara as she latched the back door. "They won't take the house," he said. Clara looked at him. "No," she agreed. "They won't." "Because you're here," he added. The words were not dramatic. They were factual, spoken with the same certainty he used for numbers and rules. Clara felt the weight of them settle, not as pressure, but as purpose. Night fell early, the way it always did when winter wanted to remind people who held the advantage. The wind returned, not howling this time, but steady, relentless. Snow brushed against the windows, soft enough to be ignored, dangerous enough to isolate. Samuel checked the perimeter one last time before coming in, snow dusting his shoulders. Clara handed him a towel without comment. He took it, their hands brushing briefly, neither of them drawing attention to it. They ate in near silence, the boys finishing quickly before being sent upstairs. When the house finally grew quiet, Samuel sat at the table, staring into nothing. "I didn't expect this," he said. Clara understood what he meant. He had expected hardship. He had expected responsibility. He had not expected threat. "They're counting on you being alone," she said gently. He looked up at her then. "I am." She shook her head. "Not anymore." The words were simple, but they altered the air between them. Samuel studied her face, searching for hesitation, fear, regret. He found none of those. What he found was resolve, steady and unremarkable, the kind that did not announce itself. Outside, the snow thickened. By midnight, the roads were already disappearing again. Clara lay awake, listening to the house. She knew its sounds now. The way the floor shifted with temperature, the quiet creak of the stairs, the low murmur of the wind against the walls. She knew which noises belonged and which would not. Sometime after midnight, she heard something else. It was faint. A sound that did not fit. Not wind, not wood, not the house settling. Footsteps. She did not move right away. She listened again, her breathing slow, her thoughts clear. The steps were careful, measured. Someone was testing the ground, learning its shape. Clara slipped from the bed and moved toward the hallway, every motion deliberate. The house held its breath around her. Downstairs, a floorboard creaked, unfamiliar and wrong. She reached the top of the stairs and paused. Below, the night was no longer empty. Clara did not rush down the stairs. Fear, she had learned, moved fastest when it was allowed to lead. She stood still at the landing, one hand resting lightly on the banister, listening again. The sound came a second time, clearer now. A boot scraping softly against wood. Another pause. Whoever was below understood silence. That made the danger sharper, not duller. She turned and went back toward the boys' rooms. Evan was already awake. He sat upright on his bed, eyes open, as if sleep had never fully claimed him. Luke stirred when Clara entered, confusion flickering across his face before he saw her expression, and went still. "Get dressed," Clara whispered, quietly. She did not say why. She did not need to. They moved together down the narrow back hall, the one Samuel had shown her weeks ago and never mentioned again. The cellar door opened without complaint. Clara guided the boys inside, easing them down the steps, her hand steady on Luke's shoulder, Evan moving ahead without hesitation. "Stay here," she said softly. "No matter what you hear." Luke nodded, his mouth pressed into a thin line. Evan met her gaze and nodded once, the same gesture his father used when words were unnecessary. Clara closed the door and turned the key. Only then did she let herself breathe fully. She moved through the house with care, her steps slow, her senses sharpened. The lamp in the hallway remained unlit. Moonlight filtered in through the windows, pale and uncertain. The living room lay ahead, its familiar shapes altered by shadow. Another sound reached her then, a thud, followed by the unmistakable creak of a door being tested. Clara crossed to the cabinet beside the stairs. She opened it and took out the shotgun Samuel kept there, the one he had shown her how to handle without ceremony. She checked it the way he had taught her, calmly, efficiently, as if this were just another task in a long list of responsibilities. The back door rattled. Clara stepped forward and spoke before fear could scatter the moment. "Stop," she said. The word cut through the quiet, clear and unwavering. There was a pause, then a low laugh, careless and wrong. A man's voice answered, confident in the way people often were when they believed they held the advantage. "No need for trouble," he said. "We're just looking." Clara raised the gun, her grip firm, her stance steady. "You're done looking," she replied. A shape moved near the doorway. Another figure shifted closer to the window. They were testing her now, gauging her resolve. Clara did not raise her voice. She did not step back. She fired one shot into the air above them. The sound shattered the night, echoing off the walls, off the land beyond. Birds burst from the eaves. Somewhere, cattle lowed in startled confusion. The men froze. "Leave," Clara said. "Now." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then footsteps retreated, hurried now, no longer careful. A window shattered as one of them lost his footing, The night swallowed them whole. Clara lowered the gun only when she was certain they were gone. Her hands trembled then, just slightly, as the adrenaline ebbed. She leaned against the wall and counted her breaths until they slowed. Outside, the wind rose again, as if the land itself had been holding back. She unlocked the cellar and opened the door. Evan climbed the steps first, his face pale but composed. Luke followed, clinging to his sleeve. Clara knelt and gathered them close, holding them until she felt their breathing steady against her. "It's over," she said. "You're safe?" They believed her. Samuel came in through the side door minutes later, blood staining his sleeve where he had fallen against the fence during the struggle outside. He stopped short when he saw Clara standing in the hallway, the boys pressed close, the gun resting against her leg. Understanding crossed his face, followed by something deeper. Recognition. "You stayed," he said. "Yes," Clara replied. The marshal arrived at dawn, his horse cutting through snow that had begun to fall again, heavier now. 2 men were caught by morning, tracked by their haste and the broken trail they left behind. They did not speak of who sent them. They did not need to. The message had failed. Henry Cole surveyed the damage, his expression grave but approving. "You did right," he told Clara. "You protected what mattered." The roads closed again that afternoon. Snow buried the land in earnest this time, sealing the ranch off from the world. For 36 hours, they were alone with the aftermath. Those hours passed differently than the storm that had brought Clara there months before. Fear was still present, but it no longer ruled the space. The house held warmth. The fire burned steadily. The boys slept without waking. Samuel's injury was minor, but Clara tended it with care, her hands sure, her focus complete. When she finished, he did not pull away. "I should have been here," he said quietly. "You were," she answered. "Just not in the same place." He considered this, then nodded. They spoke little during the storm, but what passed between them did not require language. Partnership settled into place without ceremony. It did not feel new. It felt recognized. When the snow finally eased and the sky lifted, light flooded the house in a way Clara had not seen before. The land lay quiet, untouched, as if the night had been a test it had chosen to survive. Samuel stood beside her at the window, watching the horizon reappear inch by inch. "This was never supposed to be more than shelter," he said. Clara did not look away from the light. "Sometimes," she replied, "the things we plan for survival become the things that save us." Outside, the world waited. Inside, the family remained, not because they had signed an agreement, but because they had chosen to stand together when the night demanded it. The first sign that winter was loosening its hold came quietly. It was not a sudden warmth or a dramatic change in the sky. It was the sound of water. Clara heard it one morning while opening the shutters, a thin, steady drip falling from the edge of the roof into the packed snow below. The land had begun to breathe again. Life on the ranch did not return to normal all at once. It shifted in careful increments, the way people did after surviving something they were not meant to speak about too loudly. Marshal Henry Cole returned once more to confirm what everyone already knew. The men who had broken in were tied to a larger effort to pressure landowners along the proposed rail route. Charges were filed. The message, at last, moved in the opposite direction. Samuel listened, nodded, and returned to his work. He did not celebrate. He did not linger on the danger that had passed. Instead, he repaired fences. He checked the herd. He rebuilt what had been tested. Clara watched him from the porch one afternoon and realized that for the first time since she had arrived, He moved without the weight of vigilance in every step. Inside the house, the changes were gentler. The boys slept through the night now. Luke dreamed aloud, his words tumbling together in half-formed stories. Evan no longer paused in the hallway before the nursery. The door remained open, not as a shrine, but as a room that had been given permission to exist alongside the rest of the house. Clara resumed her lessons in town. The classroom grew fuller. Parents stayed longer. Conversations stretched past polite greetings into something warmer, more personal. The looks she received changed as well. No longer measuring, no longer cautious. Acceptance arrived not with apologies, but with ease. Samuel noticed these things. He did not comment on them at first. When he did, it was with the same plain honesty he brought to everything else. "They trust you," he said one evening as they cleared the table together. Clara smiled softly. So do the boys. He met her gaze then, holding it longer than before. Something unspoken hovered between them, not urgent, not demanding, simply present. Months passed. The land softened. Snow retreated into shadows and memory. Green pushed through where white had ruled. Clara found herself walking the fence line without a coat, the air cool but forgiving. She realized one day that she no longer counted the weeks. Time had stopped feeling borrowed. The arrangement they had begun with remained in name only. In practice, it had grown into something else entirely. Samuel consulted her on decisions that had nothing to do with the house. She spoke freely, not as a guest, not as an obligation, but as someone whose voice mattered. One evening, as the sun lingered longer than expected, Samuel stopped her at the door. "We should talk," he said. They sat at the table where so many quiet decisions had already been made. The fire was low, no longer necessary for warmth, only comfort. "I don't want this to stay what it was," Samuel said. Clara waited. "I don't want it to be something that happened because winter forced our hand," he continued. "I want it to be something we choose." She considered the words carefully, not because she doubted them, but because she respected their weight. "I won't be anyone's replacement," she said gently. "Not for you, not for the boys." "I know," Samuel replied. "That's not what I'm asking." Silence settled between them, not heavy, but full. "Then yes," Clara said. They did not plan the wedding right away. There was no urgency now. When they did plan it, it was with intention rather than necessity. 7 months after the night of the storm, the ranch filled with people. The second wedding did not resemble the first in any way. There was no haste, no quiet agreement signed in shadow. This time, there were flowers gathered from the fields, bright and imperfect. Neighbors arrived early and stayed late. Laughter moved freely through the rooms that had once held only quiet. Evan stood tall, holding the rings with careful seriousness. Luke scattered wildflowers with more enthusiasm than accuracy, his joy unrestrained. Clara watched them from where she stood and felt something settle deep within her, something steady and certain. Samuel met her at the altar with a smile that reached his eyes. The vows were simple, chosen, spoken clearly, without fear of weather or want. When it was over, when the applause faded into conversation and music, the house absorbed the sound gladly. It did not echo. It held. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara stood at the edge of the porch and watched the boys chase fireflies across the yard. Samuel joined her, his presence familiar and grounding. "I never thought I'd feel this again," he said quietly. "Neither did I," Clara replied. They stood together as the first stars appeared, the land stretching out before them, no longer a place of survival, but of belonging. Winter had brought Clara to the ranch with $37 and no certainty. It had offered her a choice wrapped in necessity. What remained now was something different. Not a contract, not shelter, but a family chosen deliberately and held with care. And when the night settled in, gentle and warm, the house did not fall silent. It rested.